You're here to study Bridgman. This is recording 4 on gesture from our 2020 Summer Bootcamp. Updates are always at marshallart.com. In the spirit of stay at home, here we are in our own private cubicles. May there be joy in your cubicle. If there has not been joy in your cubicle, may there be joy in your cubicle for the next 2 hours. Our lessons have been cubicular and happening in your cubicle. Now, you're not seeing my screen yet. Let's see if this changes that. There, now you're seeing my screen. Bless you for being here in your cubicle. We are in California, South America, Russia, China, Austria, Florida, Nevada, Australia. Let us orient. The last thing we did was thickening the figure, 3 forms and variations. Today we are going to attempt to do poses, balance, and rhythm. We're certainly going to do poses and balance, but I will do as often as possible. I will have one of these marvelous drawings in front of you to keep you busy. The way you would do guitar riffs if you were a guitar student. And as far as drawings that I can put in front of you, I don't know what you think of this drawing. I think this is one of the most beautiful examples of a life drawing done by a teacher that I have ever seen. And I don't mean that like done by a teacher, yeah. I mean, it just happened to be done by a teacher. If he had not been a teacher, it still would be one of the most beautiful examples of a life drawing I've ever seen. But it did nothing for me in my early 20s. I couldn't see it. I could only see scruffiness. If you are young and it does grab you, what a life you will have. If it doesn't, one thing you have to look forward to is that the more you look, the more you see. This happens even if you don't gain skills, which makes art reviewers and art critics. But if you're seeking skills, these are things you can aspire toward. Now, this drawing has a lot in it. It has, as we have studied, proportion. He probably drew it from top to bottom, aware of the height of that head, aware of the halfway point there, that if that head were up there higher, then he'd have about a halfway point there at the groin. He was certainly aware of the rib cage. Oh, in fact, let me erase and show you that he was aware. Look at that peak, and look at that peak, and look at how we know that he was thinking of a shape in there, and that the axis is like that. We know that because he has told us over and over. And we know that the other shape in there is on an axis like that. But it's more than that. It's also spun with a center line over there. We know that because over here he's making a big deal of it. It's amazing also how shape, just flat shapes, can make something look credible. Her whole pelvic block seems about as convincing as anyone is likely to get with charcoal marks on paper. To show a strong woman. And the final thing is form. And that was the final thing we started. I want to go back to something, though. I want to go back to something we're going to take up today with the term gesture. Do you know that Bridgman's colleague, Nicolaides, would have told us not to start with the head? Nicolaides would have been more likely to have us start with a line like that. Many an animator would have you start with a line like that, and then maybe a line not that would go from, not that would go from here to here, but that would go from here to here. Why? They might do it either way, but because grounding it and then thrusting it up might be one way to do it, the other way would be to say, no, I'm going to plant that foot down that way. But you see, that doesn't determine how this figure will look exactly. It determines how the artist is feeling about the figure, which is that the figure is grounded. People call that an action line. Let's see. Glenn Vilppu, who also starts with the head, would be likely to start with something that would be more like this way, and this way, and this way, and this way, and look for how these offset apostrophes would not get too enclosed and symmetrical so that your eye would get caught in them, as happens in symmetrical poses. That's a big part of what Vilppu teaches in gesture. Now, we studied this stuff last week. And the final thing that we did last week was to study the form. And we'll take a minute here. You can be pretty sure that this pose at the left is anatomically impossible, except for some yoga master. Now watch the screen. If you're drawing, pull away from your drawing right now to watch the screen. Why is this so hard? Because that corner of the rib cage, which we've seen is anatomical, does not connect to that corner. That's just not how it works. That corner connects to this corner. In fact, let me do that again, if it will let me. You see how this might curve that way, and then it might curve that way to make it have a little sense of form. Now watch the other one. This corner over here, that corner is not going to connect to this corner. It's going to come over here. And now we've got this front plane of this abdomen and this front plane of this chest. We've got two separate forms, one of them facing up to our left, one of them facing down, we see the top of it, not the bottom of it, to our right, and we have to think in our training. Maybe not by the time Bridgman was doing this, although he was thinking it while he was explaining it to students, certainly, because he was taking the time to do that diagram. Give me just a moment. Now we go from this corner to that corner, and that corner to that corner, and with two simple forms, blocks are simple forms, we get a twisted. That other one over there on the other side is going to go over to there. We wouldn't even see it. But we might lift it up to there so that we thicken that. We've made a complex form out of two simple forms. Okay, that is what you've spent time understanding in the past few days, and it might have been 10 hours, it might have been 15 hours. With some of you, it might have been 20 hours of your time since I last saw you. So let's take a look and see what you did. The session was to draw 40 analyses of Bridgman bodies, reducing the three masses, head, thorax, and pelvis, into 3 transparent blocks. If that was easy, try redrawing them, reducing them to organic transparent forms, spheres or eggs. Think them through. And if you want an advanced task, try redrawing at least 3. Lily Penelope Watson. You did the assignment, indeed. This is nicely done. I'm going to guess you did them with pen and ink, or you did them on paper and then scanned them in, cleaned them up, composited them. The fact that you took the time to do something like that tells us that on the front of this person's body, because it's stretching, we're going to deal with this today. That means this corner of the rib cage and this corner of the rib cage. Michelangelo loved to do this. They will look so bony, so hard, because they are. Those portions are bone. But then this part in here could actually suck in and hang down as flesh. And since we're looking up both at this block and at this block, watch this next line. We're going to talk about cross contours as we go. That tells us we're looking up at that belly. And then over here where we're going to have a muscle group called the external oblique. It's not the only thing there, but watch this. That cross contour will go around there, and then notice how it curves this way, and this red plane is facing forward, and the other red plane over there will face forward, and then it'll wrap around there. Notice how this might have an extra fold of flesh there to squash it up because it's concave on that side. That's part of why you did this. Look over here, and you'll see that the neck, if that's the front of the head, we'll find out that there is behind the ear on this side. That head to that person is facing right. To us, it's facing left. To them, they're facing right. Which means over there on the left side of their ear, there is a cord, a muscle that will go to the pit of the neck and pull tight and swing that head to look over there at that character's right. And then the other portion of that muscle will wrap around there. Now, I can't be worried about those muscles if I don't know what they're connecting from and to, which will be landmark points on bones. And even though that isn't a skull yet, at least it's a form. And it's a form that I can tell I'm looking up at, which means somewhere behind that ear over there is where that's going to go. Now, that's stretched, obviously. It's contracted, and even though it's contracted, it's spinning it around there, and we'll be able to, it's pulling itself over the stuff underneath it. What about over here? These are going to be squashed, those belly muscles, because it changes direction there. Okay, I think that's enough to show why this was done. And you did a good job, Lily, and you also took the time to start. Everybody, turning what section was that? I'm going to watch the chat out of the corner of my eye. If you wrap a line like that, like an equator line around the globe, what section is that on a sphere? On any form. That is the transverse. Several people got it. What section is the one that is the center line through the nose and lips that goes over to the other side? Anyone know that one? I'll give you a hint. It would show you the side profile. That's a sagittal section. So we got one more left, and that's the one that goes down here through the ears and that if it were to go up over the top of the head and shine, it would look like that's the coronal section. Okay, good. You took the time to go over those terms and get them in your head. And those are the three. Those are the three sections that we'll find cross contours in. All right, thank you, Lily. Luca. Luca! Luca! You did the job. You did it exemplary, and I assume you did not use a straight edge on any of these, right? Unfortunately, yeah, unfortunately. No, yeah, good. There's something I forgot to emphasize last Saturday that came up in Tuesday night's Beasts class. Students trying to work out the anatomy of their fantastic animals. And one of them had just been in my animal drawing class and learned to be very meticulous about the machinery and did an understudy of the bones that showed specific planes and divisions of the pelvis in an animal that's going to be sitting down with its legs in front of us where we wouldn't even see the pelvis. And I recognized what a bad influence this meticulous machinery, analytical machinery, let me show you what I mean. It's the stuff that we are going to be doing here, body as machine and bones as muscles. It's really valuable. However, it's valuable as a student to get familiar with the fact that it's happening. There is no need in drawing a figure or a fantastic beast to do every plane of the hidden bones, but to do simply enough to know that there would be a bump there and there would be muscle spreading out around and one that aims toward it. And if those two bumps of bone, watch my hands if you can see them, those two bumps of bone come together, they're going to pinch flesh. And if they spread apart, they're going to stretch flesh. And that, again, over here, look at how that is going to be stretching away from there. And this is going to be pinching down into there. Look at this is more than enough to explain pretty much all you need to know about the basics of big figure form. And did you carry through further to turn them into organics? This is the way to start, by the way, because blocks are harder for most people at first. Dieter, you were asking about foreshortening. I'm going to talk about it now. I'm going to take 5 minutes or so, and Luca, good thinking. You said I didn't turn them into organic forms. I'm really bad about blocks and cubic forms, so I decided to focus on cubes, not necessarily cubes. Cubes are 1 by 1 by 1. Those are cubes. Not a single one of these is a cube. These are blocks. Blocks is just a way to say that it's not a 1 by 1 by 1 cube. But I am going to talk about some foreshortening here. Your question is, how to get the length of limbs when drawing the figure in perspective when the figure is foreshortened. Let me tell you how one does it. One does it by knowing what the length of the limb is. For example, if we have a thorax and we have an upper arm, and that upper arm goes out about 2 head widths from the body, the head's going to be up here. We can have that arm in many positions, and these positions are fairly easy because they're not foreshortened. So what do we do when something, let's work a little bigger here. Let's treat the bone as the simplest thing we can. Let's say that represents an upper arm. What about when that comes directly toward us? Well, if we were to see the end of a cylinder, we would see that it would look like that. You can't even tell it's a cylinder. Ortho means straight on, and it tells us this is how long it really is. Now watch what I do. I'm going to put a rubber band on there that from the side looks just like that. And if I were to draw, let's draw this, I'll go really light with my line, and I'm going to draw it several times to make this point. Let's do any one of these shapes is going to be a foreshortened arm. That's going to be the hardest one because that one's so barely foreshortened. Now I'm going to thicken up my line a little bit, and we're going to do what we did the other day, but with a difference. It's very easy to say that this end is closer to me than that end and wrap a rubber band like that, because that rubber band, which should be a circle in perspective, will help me to know that this end is closer. But that looks too long for an arm coming toward me with an opening like that. So I might say that if that arm as a block is coming toward me, I might want to make it a little bit shorter than that. And that's now starting to be credible as a block. What about this one? What if this end were closer to me? I could do this thing very easy to just wrap a rubber band around it. That gets me started. And then find a corner, snap these rubber bands tight, and I've got a form that is more coming toward me now. That's closer to a circle than it was. Let's do this one that I said was going to be hard because it's so long. It's barely coming toward us, just that little sliver over there. So the rubber band will just be barely curved like that, and we'll see an end something like that. And if we're looking down on it, now we have got the potential for a block that is quite non-foreshortened. The closer it gets to one end coming toward us, Dieter, when you're just working with a sausage, the more open the ellipse, the more curved the rubber band, and the shorter the form. Now, I hope that made sense. There is a way to do it. Did we talk about the use of a thick pencil in front of you to do this? Sarah, you're asking, how do you decide if you need to cut the ends off or not? By eye? Yes. Can you imagine if in figure drawing, if you were to get out your T-square and triangle and do a plan projection from an ortho and then figure out, I'll go from here to here and then project all these lines. How would you ever do a figure drawing? But by practicing, you start to see that something looks too open. Now, here is a way to train your eye, or here's a way to cheat. Let's just cheat. There's a kind of pencil that I like. I like these Pilots. And if I'm holding this thing, let's get it so you can see it, right up to myself, level with my eye, this will have horizontal lines across it. You could put little rubber bands around there. And if you tip it toward yourself, look at what will happen if that eraser is a nice flat eraser. You'll start to see the top of it. Eventually, it will come right toward you and become a circle. And and look, you can't see the length of the pencil now. And the opposite will happen in the other direction, that if you tip it away from you, it will start to disappear around to the other side. And that is a way to sit in front of a model if you're working from a model, or look at a photograph and hold your pen in the position that will make that clear. Did that make sense, Sarah? I seriously love your explanation. I've always had trouble with foreshortening, and this 10-minute demonstration taught me more than the countless tutorial videos I watched on the subject. It makes so much sense. Okay, good. Good. What we're trying to do is point toward the reality that a human limb and a human body are three-dimensional entities. And they're complex three-dimensional entities. Let's go back to sharing screen. They are complex three-dimensional entities, and because they are complex, we must, in order to draw them with control, in order to be able to tip them around, we must simplify. You cannot look at a hand like that and then suddenly turn it around in these different positions if you're thinking about every detail. And yet your subconscious mind does it every night when you dream. You do incredible imagining of that. But that's the quote we started this term with, this month with, which is that the subconscious mind must take care of a great deal. Therefore, learning to draw means acquainting the subconscious mind with a good deal while we draw, while we learn, and then the subconscious can take over. Okay, I hope that helped. Dieter, here is a way that you can find in Bern Hogarth's book that can be useful, and many other teachers have shown it also. And that is, can you, if you are trying to draw a limb, let's say you're trying to draw a foreshortened leg. I can't draw a foreshortened leg. Yeah, but I could draw a leg from the side, and I could pretend like it's like I'm going to be over here at the right, looking this way, and I could run a line. Let's go to the line tool and see if we can do this. Let's run a line horizontally over there and run a line horizontally over here and run, this is a tough one, because see, this is where we're going to have the information we need. We need to run that line over there and run this line over here. And what have we got? We've got some markers that will allow us to, watch what I do. However that upper leg is going to be, that upper leg, the top of it is going to have to land right there. And the knee is going to be, well, that knee is going to be stretched out into here. And then what about the the nose of the tibia? That's going to be there. Where's the ankle going to be? Let's do it a little bit more like this. That ankle is going to go back there, and it's going to have to all fit into there. Do you see that? And then that heel of the foot will be up there, and it will come down there like that, and the toe will be like that. So there is a way, in answer to your question, there is a way to do it from the side and know that if you spin it on a Lazy Susan, the thing that was this long, watch this, the thing that was this long becomes this long. Did that help? Did it make sense? Wow, and crystal clear here. That second demo was also very helpful. Okay, these were useful things to stop and deal with. I think that this is from one view, and then if you were to walk around that person from the back, is that what we're looking at? Yes, okay. All right, everybody. I wonder how many of you tried right angle studies. The first time we ever did a right angle study, when you do it from a live model in a room where you're close to the stage and perspective affects how their feet are on the ground and the foot that's closer to you is lower in the ground plane, and then you try to imagine how that's going to be in 90 degrees. I don't know that I'm going to take much time with it now because I think I would do it clunkily, but let me make a note that we would take time to do a 90-degree study tomorrow as a demo. Let me just show quickly here as an insert what I meant. This is close to the model. The closer you get, the more you exaggerate perspective problems. Case in point, left foot forward and lower, left foot still forward and lower, left foot forward and higher, left foot higher, left foot lower. It moves up and down in your vision because it's below us, moving away on a level surface up to the horizon. You know that only if you know perspective. If not, don't worry too much about it now. It gets involved. But let me tell you, if you want to try it, if you are working on it. There are a couple of tricks. One is the slow motion analytical way, which is that you say the chest compared to a vertical line, the chest is angled back. So that means whichever position I'm in, if I'm behind the thing, if I'm behind that body, the chest will be angled back. The head is angled down. So if I'm behind that body, let me quickly show you what I mean when I say behind that body. That person's going to be in a position like this, say, where they're not facing toward us. That head is angled down from a vertical line. And since we're in front of it, we see the top of it. But since we're behind it, we would not see the top of it. We'd see a little bit underneath it, like so. And those hips are angled back in the opposite way of the chest. And so I'm going to have them in a position like this. I'm in front of them looking down on them. I'm behind them looking up at those hips. So look what I do. I make a little cylinder like that, and then I try to turn it into something box-like. And that will let me know that I'm going to look up at those hindquarters. And then all the other stuff. This, because it's compressed, will pinch. This, because it's extended, will stretch. But the first thing is to simply name whether something's looking up or down, and then a little further. If this is the front of their face, that's one thing. If this is the front of their face, that's another thing. And we could say the front of their face is looking to their right. The head is angled down, and they're looking to their right, which means they aren't looking that way. They may be looking that way. I think they're looking that way. Well, that means we're going to do something different than what I did here. We're going to look up at that head, and we're going to have them slightly looking. That is, one ear will be there, the other ear will be there, the back of the head will be there, and their nose will be over there, and they'll be looking that way. This is by naming aspect. That's the long position of anything, how something's tipped, and direction, or it's technically called yaw. Hey, I am going to spend a couple minutes here because we didn't do this last week, and we ran out of time. Pitch, yaw, and roll. Do any of you know what that means? If you do, you can just brag in there. I know what it means. You know it if you fly airplanes. I'm going to clear my drawings and start over. Pitch is when you have a cylinder lying on the ground with a vertical line going through it, and when it faces toward you, or it faces to your left, or extremely to your left, or to your right. And I know I'm doing these roughly, but you can see, even though I'm doing them roughly, I can kind of see through there where they're coming through. That comes from doing a lot of slow motion stuff. And the way, I'm sorry, that's not pitch, that's yaw. That's yaw. Yeah. That is, yaw is spinning on the y-axis. Y. Pitch is spinning on X. Here's what that means. If you've got a cylinder in a position like this, and you've got a spool that goes, a center that goes through there like that, things might face up, They might go away from us a little bit like that. They may come toward us like this. They may aim down. They may aim straight down. They can be in all sorts of positions as they go in the sagittal plane, movement in the sagittal plane. The sagittal section or the sagittal plane. Spinning on Y is on the in the transverse plane. We got one more to go. What is it? It's that if we were to take this right here and say, I now want to make things go around this way, that would be spinning on the z-axis, and that's called roll. Roll spins on z in the coronal plane. Now again, you can find this in many books. If you are a 3D animator, if you're any kind of animator, you already know about this stuff because it's just so, you can hardly do 3D animation. I can't imagine you doing 3D animation and actually moving things around with having to have dealt with those terms. But it's a different thing to draw this and to be able to say about every one of these cylinders that it is slightly coming toward me or starting to go away from me. Those are the three kinds of movement. Now, why did I go on this aside? I'm going to move on in just a moment because I know that that was quite a long aside. I hope it was useful to you. Why? Why would we deal with airplane controls? Why would we deal with remote controls for movement in a Bridgman Bootcamp? Because this is one of the ways you figure out how to do a 90-degree study. By naming the position of this, that it is pitched down, that it is yawed to the left, and even by a certain number of degrees. And it also may be tipped. It may be, the head may be, watch this, if that's the front view, that head may be tipped to the side this way or tipped to the other side that way, and that change of aspect side to side, as well as front to back, and then spun left to right, to take the time in a 90-degree angle study and relate these all to a perfect vertical. That's one way to do it. Another is to swap out your X and Z lines. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Brendan, you did the work and you misspelled Bridgman's name. I was so impressed with you for a few moments there. I'm going to forgive you, but third time, punishments. Okay, this is to show you, folks. This is to show you that people around the world, along with you, are doing this. Phoenix, this is quite incredible. And this is not with a 3D program. It is digital. I assume it's with Photoshop or you do something else. Each column corresponds to the topmost drawing, rotating the angle, then tilting down and up. Although plenty boxes came out distorted or changed shape between drawings, I feel that I got a far better sense of what looks right by the end. Phoenix! You did it! This was work. And this wide angle lens stuff is great. Now, you mentioned the proportions. The proportions go weird. I want to give you permission about proportions. This is going to sound a little lackadaisical for a boot camp. But we know that a head is not proportioned that way. A head is quite proportioned this way. We know that this one is too squat and this one is too flattened. However, you at least worked out these line system, and that is rehearsing one of the things that Robert Beverly Hale made such a big deal out of. It's rehearsing one of those things, that every form has its own horizon line, as people keep asking about, its own vanishing points, as people could ask. Even though you're not really putting that vanishing point in there, you're just saying, I'm looking down at that head and I see the top. There it is. I'm looking up at this head and I see the bottom. There it is. That's, instead of putting a horizon line in there, that does it. And I see this side of that, and I can put a line on there, and look, I've got a three-planed thing like a box. Okay, enough about form. I'm going to pause for a moment. That was what we studied on Saturday, and then I turned you loose, and you spent 3 to 4 days working on it, and the fruits of your work are in front of us. I hope it was encouraging. Even if you didn't do them, to see how all of these examples are so oppressive. My brain is trying hard to decipher it. Sarah, if it takes a long time, it's doable. And if you get the idea, I've got to know it like Scott Robertson knows cutaways of machines. You don't need to know it that well. But you do need to know it well enough to give some thickness to the form. Katerina, the best way to practice pitch, yaw, and roll is to do those little diagrams like I explained there. A cylinder this way, that's on the y-axis. Try drawing it and putting little things in it that are pointing each way. A cylinder this way, that's on the x-axis. It pitches forward. And try putting little spikes in it that go around. And a cylinder this way that goes that way. And you have to give it, you can't make it completely foreshortened, or it's just a shape mechanism. And that's advanced. That's advanced. Jonathan, Brett Schneider, you are asking a legitimate question. When are we going to talk about pose, balance, and rhythm? Jonathan, Brett Schneider, here we go. Okay, this was useful to some of you. All right, let's go back to one of my favorite drawings. Right back to this favorite trio of drawings, and let's take this figure, the one in the center. And I have a question for you. This is about balance. It's a yes or no question. It may be a trick question. You're going to help me. Is this figure in the center balanced? No. Say some. Nobody's saying yes. Somebody's saying yes. Let me tell you something. If this center in the figure, if that toe is not touching the ground, and it isn't going to attempt to touch the ground and maybe push down a little bit, what will happen with this figure if they are not going to touch that toe to the ground? Tell me. I'm interested to know. It will fall over to our left. Why? Because we've got a leg over here under this pivot point. We've got an arm presumably stuck out there. We've got this arm, instead of throwing out that way to counterbalance it. And so you could say this figure is not balanced. And so if you get the idea that a figure must be balanced, it's a wrong impression. But if a figure isn't balanced, it's probably in motion, falling, rising, and if it doesn't continue, it would fall back, rising too fast and then going over the center and falling in the other direction. And if you never gave any thought to this before today, that's what you're going to give thought to for the better part of the next hour, and for the next 20 hours, you're going to be putting some energy into this. If you haven't given this thought about figures, you have given it plenty of feeling. A good deal of your early childhood, with the grown-ups standing around cheering for you, was related to getting a grip on this balance thing. When you watch great classic animation from the 1930s and 40s in particular, you know that those animators were very in touch with where weight was. Now, we're going to move from a great drawing by Bridgman to something that you can do in a matter of a minute. In fact, if you got your sketchbook there, you might want to do this. You know by now how to put a mark at the top and put a mark at the bottom and find the halfway point and get an egg in there and get a pelvis in there and find knees halfway down and get a head in there. And this guy moved his head a little to his left, a little to our right, but he's essentially standing there still. If he were to take this arm, his right arm, and throw it over to the right, let's say he throws it over to the right like this, what other thing might happen? As you draw it, you may be able to feel it out. I can tell you, if you were to stand up and physically do it, you do it. It's a survival thing. He'd throw his right foot out. My goodness, that happens instinctively. And when it happens on a real human, on a real 1.5-year-old, well, maybe on a 1.5-year-old, I'm wrong. On a grown-up, it is not thought through. I have thrown my right arm to my left. Therefore, I will throw my right leg to my back. It doesn't go on. It goes on in your subconscious. Could you imagine being a draftsperson of such skill that when you drew an arm that extended one way, you would know to put this way to keep balance? If you do get to that level, that's valuable to have. And that's part of what you work on right now and through the day. Is that the only possibility? What if he were to throw his arm even further out? Is there another thing he might do? We're looking at all the options for what a human body can do in keeping from falling over. Well, he could go on one leg, yes. He could figure that my body is going to be on this right leg and I'm going to throw that way out while I throw this arm way over there. And he's going to try to make the weight over there and the weight over here, 2 arms, 1 leg. I think that I'm balanced. That's one possibility, yeah. But I'm trying to get you to think of more than one possibility. It could just more extreme. If you stand up and stretch your right, okay, watch this. You could do this. Now, if you are working this out on paper, the options might not occur to you. But tonight, I'm not going to do it right now in class because we're the better part of an hour in. Tonight, you'll want to get on your feet and strike some of these poses in Bridgman's book or any of the other resources you have. And you may want to see what it feels like. And here's a hint about doing this. If I stayed in this position long, what would start to hurt? If I stayed in this position long, what would drive me crazy? Pose. Poses evolved in art. I've never made a study of Egyptian poses. Robert Beverly Hale has referred to them. I've heard people talk about how they chose the most characteristic position to be able to quickly recognize it, and they put them together without any concern for anatomical verisimilitude, where it looks like it's really a figure. It was more icons, like you design letter forms to make them easily read. But when you get to Greek sculpture, and I'm talking archaic period, I'm talking 2,600 years ago, they did sculptures of figures, a lot of male figures. I think they were called kouros, Kouros, but this was the earliest pose. It was symmetrical, vertical, standing at attention. Why would they choose a pose like that? It's strong. It says, here I stand as a pillar. If you bring these feet out like this, that makes it stronger left to right. I can be not knocked out left to right. If you put one of those feet back and the other one forward, it says it's going to be hard to knock me over from behind. But they weren't thinking that way yet. It took time. So strong, so steady, so strong and so steady and so strong and so steady that at some point, if you're feeling their feelings, you'll start to feel, can't I just shift my weight here a bit? You know this happens when you stand at long lines at Disneyland. You cannot stand at attention. You'll shift to one side and shift to another. The Greeks, a few hundred years later, started to see, hey, let's make these things look more, we use the term naturalistic, like real people stand. Now what have we got? We have got weight on the model's left leg. Bridgman's aware of that. How did he get there? He did the things that you're going to do between now and tomorrow to give it attention, to stand in that pose, to look at this pose and connect with the model. If you seek a character of flesh and blood, as N.C. Wyeth talked about his characters in illustrating characters from stories, not mannequins. You can pose a mannequin, but a character of flesh and blood and nerves that knows what it feels like to fall over will adjust their body. How does it happen? The first step is that the artist has to be aware of it. Now, I'm going to switch from this picture to a list of traits that we experience as humans in bodies of flesh and blood. This is a contrapposto, yes. Counter positions. They go like this. Watch this, watch this. If you've got, sorry, I'm going to make a thicker line. If you got the weight on that leg and the hips drop down, Bridgman knows that. Well, if they drop down and this leg is straight, doesn't this one need to fold a little? Ooh, watch that. It's a little bit foreshortened. Why? Because if it were fully straight, it would be long, and we need a little extra. It's down lower already, so we need to fold it a little. Okay. How does that have to be counteracted? Well, it's a good chance, not necessarily, but if the person's balanced, the line of the corners of the rib cage will be at a counter position to that. What about the head? The head very well may do the other thing. Okay, I'm going to move on in a moment. There you go. It's pretty much the same figure, too. Can you tell that he might have been doing a demo saying, what if I were over on the other side of the room? Not a 90-degree study in that case. It looks like about 160, 170 degree study where he got around to the other side. No, it's a little different, but it's not meticulous. He's thinking of the boxes, not drawing them. Now, we're back to this issue of what bodies experience. Here's the first thing. physical forces, and the first physical force we've talked about is gravity. I'm going to take 2 minutes to talk about gravity. Weight. It's such a big deal. I didn't used to think it was that much of a big deal until I got older. Lots of kids don't give gravity much thought because they climb all over things, but they have falls. And they find out that gravity is a big deal. And one little aside here. I know of a guy who took a class in outer space, the phenomena of being an astronaut in outer space. One of the things they found out is that no matter what exercise equipment you give these people who spend months or a year in outer space, there is no exercise that will overcome what we need. Our bodies are in this state meant to be on Earth, where gravity pulls us down. And if it doesn't, there's something missing, that if we are going to rise, we on this planet must rise against gravity. Apparently that is more valuable than we are aware of in any moment. But this is the hour, and this is the next 20 hours to give it some thought, because it has everything to do with pose. Are there other forces? Yes, there's another force that is exactly like gravity, except that it doesn't pull down. Wind. If you're underwater, water currents. Someone pulling or pushing. Actually, someone pulling would be more like gravity. What's another physical force? Pressure. Well, what's that mean? Anything that tugs, anything that pinches. If you say that part compresses and harden those lines and put extra flesh in there, and that part stretches, it extends, that is a force, a physical force. Bridgman makes an accordion. You've seen it in the book. He puts a rib cage like that and a pelvis like that, and he says, there's the side where the extra parts of the accordion pinch in, and here's the part where they stretch out. That's another set of physical forces that affects pose. Here's a big one. Motion. Now, Bridgman books, 1920 through 1940-ish. In one of the early ones, he writes this: the continuous slow motion picture has given us a new appreciation of rhythm in all visible movement. In pictures of pole vault or steeplechase, we actually may follow with the eye the movement of every muscle and note its harmonious relationship in relation to the entire action of the man or the horse. Now I'm ahead. I jumped ahead to rhythm. And we're going to extend rhythm into tomorrow's session, because rhythm's a big deal. And I want to mention something. Rhythm can be confusing when you read it in these books, because he is talking about more than one kind of rhythm. Balance can be confusing, because he is talking about more than one kind of balance. I will clarify the balance thing in the next half hour, and I will maybe clarify the rhythm thing. But we have to, this is why you're taking a class in Bridgman's book. On the first day, when I was explaining how confused I was when he said that this part was round, do you remember how he said it? Don't look round. What he meant is that in cross section, the transverse section of that is fairly round. The transverse section of the knee is fairly square, and the transverse section of the lower leg is quite triangular. But he never said that in the description. He just said the thigh is round, the knee is square, and the lower leg is triangular. We're going to have the same problem with these words of rhythm and balance. I will deal with it, but I'm jumping ahead to rhythm here. Watch this. What is this slow motion picture? Well, remember, film was new in the early 20th century. In the late 19th century, look at those dates. Thomas Eakins in the United States was doing these experiments with athletes and film. And as primitive as that seems to you by today's comparisons with color photography and full 4K video on your smartphone, can you imagine how incredible that was to people then to document human motion? This is a guy throwing a punch. This is Edward Muybridge. I'm going to tell you about him. I mean, the photographer is Edward Muybridge. I'll get back to this one. This is one of the great innovations in human perception, to use photography in its early stages to scientifically prove what happens in that movement that we could not have known previous to it. Now, let's get back to Bridgman and balance. He says, the faster a person moves, the more extreme they throw themselves out of balance. That the pendulum, if it's just making a little arc like that, might be kind of tired. But if it's swinging all the way over to there, it's going to have to rebound and motion. We're not just talking about balance now. We're talking about motion. The faster a person moves, the more extreme they throw themselves out of balance. And this pendulum swinging might confuse you. It did me until just the last week or so, where I spent some time with it. This I understand. It's static. He's not moving. This, when I see an angle like this, it makes me say, how come I don't see an angle like that? But the reason why is that this guy has his pivot point, fulcrum, is down on the ground. This has it above. So this is swinging over to the right, and this is swinging over to the right. Okay, I get it now. But I want you to see that the metaphors for movement are particularly important, not with a clock pendulum, but with just the awareness of fixed points, pivot points, and moving points. Everybody knows that we have a joint in the hip right here. We're going to find that great trochanter of the femur and the ball and socket joint that's just barely in there will come down and make an upper leg bone, and then there'll be condyles on there. And we know that that can swing. It can't swing very far back, actually. You end up having to move the pelvis to get it far back, but it'll swing way up. And how does it swing? It swings as an arc from that ball and socket joint. Well, the whole leg could do that. And when you study anatomy, you're aware of that. But I think what most people don't pay attention to until they animate is that the more important fulcrum is the one on the ground. Because this foot, when it's locked to the ground, is truly on the ground, stuck. And so that foot has been there since it planted itself down. And now watch this. And it has arced over to a position like that to where it can't stand it anymore. And then it's going to swing this foot forward to land over there, lift this one up. and go back and forth like that. Now, let's take a look at Edward Muybridge's photographs of this happening. You see, this guy's leg will swing from the perfect side view. It will make almost a perfect circle. It will swing from that pivot point. But watch what happens when he swings this leg forward and makes it touch the ground and it contacts the ground, and then we will have this hip make an arc. It will get higher and lower around that pivot point. The upside down pendulum that is part of movement. The metaphor for this guy, for this foot, is like a spoke in a wheel, right? That's on the ground. That was on the ground. It will be on the ground later. And it just sort of goes like the four legs of a horse, which look like a spoke in a wheel. Now, of course, this is going to move. It's going to swing from that pivot point over on the other side, but it's not going to go in a circle because a knee bends, and so he'll probably bring it more like in a French curve over to where it needs to be. Now, I know I'm spending a lot of time in this course on explaining something that animators take for granted. If you're an animator, I'm sorry to have taken you back to step one. But it relates to your homework. The guy at our left, what could we deduce about this? You know, we have to assume that he is in motion and not just standing in a power pose. You see, this could be a power pose, not moving, just letting you know that he's strong. But granted that he is moving, and we're assuming he's moving forward, what's he going to have to do? Well, this leg's going to stay on the ground. That's planted, which means we know that that's going to make an arc that way. What else is going to have to happen? If he's moving forward, this is trailing behind. Boy, that's the baggage. That's the caboose. We've got to lift it up, and we've got to swing it forward. And these double arcs that happen when animators draw, they actually draw out the arcs. And tomorrow, not today's, but tomorrow's project for Saturday will be to do some of Kimmo Nicolaides' potential poses, where you take a pose and then you say, what could happen next from that? And there's nothing that's going to make it easier for you than someone who's in motion, because this guy doesn't want to fall down on his head. It hurts. So he's going to have an impulse to pull some muscles in that hip and swing that leg over. Actually, it'll be quite a bit further forward than what I'm doing. And catch himself. And then when this one is trailing back, he'll kick it off the ground and swing it forward. And those series of multiple arcs, even if you're not an animator, what is the quote that I gave you from Bridgman? It was, the continuous slow motion picture has given us a new appreciation of rhythm in all visible movement. Movies of the pole vault or steeplechase, we may actually follow with the eye the movement of every muscle and its harmonious relation to the entire action of the man of the horse. Now, if you want to pursue this further, we spent about 10-15 minutes on Muybridge and Akins. If you want to pursue it further, this is the classic source. I never tire of it. But you don't need it. You can learn this from video better if these books are too expensive. Let me tell you another, this is an aside, but this is interesting. When these books came out, They were not printed as books. They didn't have offset lithography back then. You couldn't pay $20 for a book like this because they had to be done in the darkroom. A book was actually done from plates. And in the process of that, it was so much work that I'm told the price of a full collection was about the price of a house. That means rich artists like Degas could have a set. Other artists could still have a few plates. I have one of the horse, one of the human male running, one of the human female running, one of the child, and that was their study. My gosh. Well, Dover reprinted 60 of their best, and then later came out with them as the CD-ROM version. Now, to finish up the MyBridge stuff, a few good animation teachers. To learn those basics enough to where you can look at any still photo and tell two things. What happened just before that position and what happened either after or could have happened after. And then you're going to get at what George Bridgman gets at in his 2 paragraphs on balance. He only has 2 paragraphs in the whole collection of books, 2 paragraphs on balance. You will get at that with some lessons from animators, which they did not have access to in 1920. Let's finish it this way. People move by throwing themselves out of balance and catching themselves. Pivoting, repeating the procedure. Artists who notice these lines can bring rhythm to their drawing. They can make a drawing look nice by comparison to an artist who does not even sense that that rhythm is there. Now, that was a long time on motion, but it was in response to Bridgman. I'm going to make another point about motion, and I'm going to go faster. What did the animators give us? One thing they gave us is the awareness of drag and follow-through. When a naked body runs or walks, you don't notice it that much. But when a body has hair and it is moving fast, you will notice something, that if it's moving this direction, the hair might go back like that. It may have been starting like this with the hair straight down. But when it moves forward, hair and drapery and beads of sweat will not be able to move as fast as the primary form. That's useful for animators. That's useful for any artists. What's follow-through? Follow-through is that if somebody is running and they suddenly stop, that is, their body suddenly stops as they put their foot out and they're going to stop, that hair will keep going and those beads of sweat will keep going and those sleeves and that clothing will continue to go forward. Those two phenomena, that when the body moves, the hair, the clothing, or the little kid who's not going willingly will hold back and delay. The opposite is that we move, we stop too fast, the cherries go flying. Sometimes when a thing stops, the movable stuff on it, like sweat beads and the fruit you're carrying, keep going. Now, when you look at comic book artists, speed lines are graphic depictions of drag. They don't have to be accurate, but aren't they exciting? And when you are looking at even those old photographs, Let me ask you, without looking at the numbers, which I don't even think you can see the numbers anyway, I didn't necessarily put these in left to right first. Which of these two drawings comes first? This one or this one? There's a way to know. Is she moving the can forward or back? Ah, she went from here to here, and we know this because the spray of the water drags. Woo! We have got something that a child may be able to figure it out. Grown-ups sometimes don't, because they're saying, gosh, what year was that photograph taken? They didn't work on film back then? They worked on glass plates? Oh, it's black and white. Huh. I'm supposed to learn anatomy. There's a vertical line in there somewhere. You could, and tomorrow and into Saturday, you may look at something like this and say, that might be a perfectly still moment. What a dangerous look at. But you see, if that was thrusting, that if there were streamers on it, they'd go like that. But if he were pulling back in the opposite direction, if he was to pull back that way, then it might leave some things there. That's actually amazingly apparently a still picture. If Muybridge were to tug on this guy's hand so that he has to lean forward, and then he'd have to put more pressure there to keep from falling over, and then maybe throw that leg out there to keep from falling over. That would be one set of dynamics. Dynamics are how things change. But if he, the stronger man, and by the way, the guy on the right is Muybridge, if this guy were to pull on Muybridge's hand, can you see how hard it would be, since Muybridge is standing with these legs together? He's apparently not an athlete. Well, he was pretty athletic, but he also seems a little sheepish about this guy. He's in a position where it'd be easy to pull him over. And the first thing he'd do is throw that leg out to counterbalance, maybe throw that arm out to counterbalance it. Ah, interesting thing. Sarah said, oh, I was looking at legs, didn't even think of the water. Sarah, that strong man, this guy, he's throwing a punch. Watch this. He threw that punch, and now he pulls it back. And if we go the other way, that's the end of his cycle. You have to pay close attention to this. If you loop it backward, it looks wrong because it is wrong. This is very sophisticated. But when he throws this punch, there are muscles, the serratus anterior right there, and the pectoralis, that are going to pull the humerus and the scapula behind it forward. Watch this. When we go like that, muscles are doing that. He's also pulling on his tricep to straighten that arm. And he's pulled it as straight as he can pull it, and he's continuing. Look at how that shoulder blade has gone around there. It's being pulled by muscles we can't see, and then it makes contact. And then when he wants to pull it back, he's going to use the latissimus dorsi and that one underneath there, the teres major. This is the stuff physical therapists know. Watch this. He's going to use that to pull it back. But if you were to go in the backward direction, even though he has no clothing on him, that would make it, if he had drapery on him, it would be really obvious that it's running backward. But watch the screen. You can tell it was run backward. How can you tell it was run backward? The wrong muscles are pulling, and the rhythm of the arc of his arm. It doesn't make sense. It looks nice, but it doesn't make sense. That makes sense. This doesn't make sense. And how would you know that? Well, I could tell, but I could tell on a subconscious level. But that's part of why I'm in here, eager to be studying Bridgman along with you, is that Bridgman emphasizes this. To know what the figure is doing. All right, let's go back to what we're doing. We are noticing weight. We are noticing wind. We are noticing drag and follow through, and all of these things are the physical world of forces that an artist can use to make it feel like a physical world of forces in there. But how can an artist use these things if an artist hasn't spent a good deal of hours and maybe a few months noticing those things consciously so that later the subconscious mind can take them over? I have to move on. Here is a whole other category, an internal physical force that we experience because we have bodies, and it's a thing we all know in the real world, and it's emotion. Your posture this week and the way that you moved was affected by things going on in your feelings. Everyone's body reflects how they feel, or don't, unless we make an effort to hide those feelings. And we usually make an effort not to show those feelings physically because the emotions might be a problem. We're trying hard not to smile. We're trying to look like we're happy when we're not. Tremendous influence on a body, but it's a whole other area. Very important in storytelling, staging and acting and character development. It's core. It's the core thing in staging and acting. But there's no time for it here. However, there's a teacher from the same time as Bridgman who the bulk of his teaching is about all of these forces, physical, emotional, external and internal, all of them collectively. What teacher am I referring to? I watched the chat. Nicolaides. This is the book which everyone has an opinion about, including not having an opinion. I have an opinion, but it's not a simple opinion, so it just confuses some people. I don't want to confuse you. I want to clarify. So let me say this. Here's a fact about Nicolaides' book, as far as I know. I'm telling you the best I know. No book that I know puts more energy into getting you, the artist, to pay attention to the model as a swirl of molecules affected by physical forces, including their own weight related to gravity and emotion, and maybe even invisible forces beyond. I'm not saying that this book does it the best. I'm saying it does it the most. If you know another book that does it more or better, tell me. I would team it up with Don Richardson's Acting Without Agony, which is a whole different actors and directors approach. We've talked about pose and balance, a little bit about rhythm. I turned them into 3 words. Pose is the position. Balance starts to have to do with motion, physical forces, gravity pulling you down. You can fall one way or another. Rhythm, we haven't developed it. But before we do, I think that instead of using these 3 terms, we could just use one term. Those of you who know Nicolaides, what would be the one term that would count for all 3 of those? Millicent says, I don't know how to read this, but yeah, gesture. For several years, every art teacher whose work or whose students I admired, I asked them how they taught gesture. I got quite a few different answers, but most of them were short studies. Short studies, 30 seconds, a minute, not more than 2 minutes, where you have to get the whole figure drawn during that short study. Now, there was more to it than that. Many people said more than that, but that I'm telling you what they all had in common. Short, don't stop, or at least don't stop for long, and complete the whole figure. Some would add straight and curved lines. Some would appeal to metaphors, like put the lines down as if you're skiing. Let the lines flow through the figure like a school of fish, where they go in one direction and then they suddenly dart and change another and a dart. Put the lines down like a roller coaster. But what they all had in common is that they should not be long studies. What does Kimon Nicolaides teach in this book? This week, I went through the book and I put together 3 pages of his comments on gesture. I want to show you one page. It's exercise number 2 after the contour drawing. In quick studies, Nicolaides is the one who invented this term gesture. He's the one who coined it. In quick studies, you will consider the function of action, life, or expression. Wow, those are big abstract terms. I call it gesture. In the first 5 seconds, you should put something down that indicates every part of the body in the pose. Gosh, 5 seconds, that's hard. Remind yourself of this once in a while by limiting a group of gesture studies to 5 or 10 seconds each. Really? Yeah, I'm trying to remind you. If it's going to be gestural, you don't want to think it too much through. As the pencil roams, it will sometimes strike the edge of the form, but more often it will travel through the center of forms, and often it will run outside the figure, even out of the paper altogether. Do not hinder it. Let it move at will. Above all, do not slow down and start to meticulously analyze edges. Now, he says many other things. Gesture is movement in space. Here is the deal that has to do with your homework. To be able to see the gesture, you must be able to feel it in your own body. You should feel that you are doing whatever the model is doing. If you do not feel as the model feels, your drawing is only a map or a plan. He says again, in a gesture drawing, you feel the movement of the whole form in your whole body. The focus should be on the entire figure, and you should keep the whole thing going at once. Try to feel the entire thing as a unit of energy, a unit of movement. He said that students ask him, how should we be thinking of the figure? He said, my response is that you should not be thinking of the figure. Rely on sensation rather than thought. Sarah, when you draw and you do these minute studies, simply respond with your muscles to what the model is doing and let your pencil record that response automatically without thinking. Loosen up, relax. Here's a big secret of creativity. Malcolm Gladwell wrote an entire book called Blink, which is a worthwhile book. Most of the time, your instinct will guide you, sometimes guide you the better, if you can learn to let it act swiftly, in a blink, and directly, without paralysis by analysis. What does he end this with? The study of gesture is not simply a matter of looking at the movement that the model makes and analyzing it and saying pitch, yaw, and roll and doing the stuff that gave Sarah a headache. You must also seek to understand the impulse that exists within the model and causes the pose which you see, to not break my head, to step back a safe distance from that naked man, to let him know that I'm stronger than him, to water that area as opposed to this area, and to do it quickly because I'm running out of water, to get into the feelings of the character, to know that this guy is pouring himself into punching, and once he's done the punch, to pull it back and to have his legs spread from forward to backwards so that when he throws himself out of balance, he doesn't fall over. Look at the way that leg grips. That's a leg where the muscles are tensed. This is a leg where the muscles are relaxed. Corey Finger, this reminds me of how animators act out their animations in person. Indeed. That's your job tonight. Frazetta would do this often too. Stand in the pose, do the motion, act it out to feel the tensions and flexing of things. The first student of mine who did this so consciously was Justin Sweet. When he would do a warrior, he would get into that warrior's position and get up into that position multiple times to see what it was like until he knew that position. And you see other people, Frazetta would do it too, but you see other people who will do superpower characters that look like mannequins. They look like they've been placed in that position and they don't feel strong because there's no empathy. Even if you copy a photograph and copy it exactly, you may be stuck with a photograph that wasn't the best position to show the feeling you're trying to get expressively. Now, I want to give you a little hint why people get confused. Draw not what the thing looks like, but what it is doing. Yeah, you made that point over and over, Kimon. And he's talked about gesture as action, gesture as movement. By gesture, we do not mean simply movement or motion or action. A thing does not have to be in motion to have gesture. You seek for it when the model is relaxed just as much in a very active pose. Gesture cannot be understood by reading my book. To discover it, there is required only practice and awareness on your part. You learn about it more from drawing than from anything I can say. It is, look at the last pitch. I'm going to move away from everything Nicolaides says about gesture in just a minute. It is far more important that your studies contain this comprehension of movement of gesture than that they contain any other single thing. Really? Are you that dogmatic about it? Yeah. That's how dogmatic Nicolaides is. Might throw some people off. Don't paint the sleeve, paint the action of the fist. It doesn't apply to everybody. Leyendecker does not paint the action of the fist. Leyendecker paints the sleeve and makes the sleeve look marvelous. But I have exposed you to this. No matter what path you pursue, Nicolaides says you keep going back to gesture, and he trained alongside Bridgman in the same building in New York in the 1920s. Some really remarkable artists. Now, let's sum this up. One thing about balance is that it has to do with the figure itself. These figures are balanced. The feeling of level, of steady, or if they were not level, of tipsy, that let us stand still or break into motion. Now watch the screen, watch the screen. If we want to break into motion from those positions, you have this in your book. Yeah! Woo! One kind of balance is physical balance. The balance the figure feels. And look at the tools that he's using. Look at the straightness of that line and the awareness of that pelvic block and how exaggerated that is. And look at how exaggerated that is. Here's what Nicolaides writes about it. I want figures that look alive and dynamic. Throw them out of balance. That's physical. Now, I said that balance has two meanings. One is the balance of the figure in there. that you're going to empathize with. Here's the second meaning of balance. Too much stillness, Too much movement, Too much straightness, Too much crooked or twisted or bent or curved. Too much anything. We can get too much of almost anything, and that's where the issue of balance has to do with the elements of picture making. One of the great skills of master artists is that they balance forms that are lined up and forms that are out of control. Thick forms and flat forms. Realism and stylization. Big and small. Left and right areas of the picture plane. Some composition books never even go any further than that. Soft edges and found edges. Oh, look how beautiful he does that. When he lets that just ever so subtly whisper, look at that gastrocnemius that ever so subtly goes behind there. He's got dark lines and light lines and straight lines and curved lines. And watch this, curves that way and straights that curve the other way. This is a completely different kind of balance from what the figure is feeling. The figure does not know that the artist is making lines that curve one way or another. And it is these abstract artistic elements, lines and angles and straights and curves, these opposites that an artist balances. Now, you know what we've just done. You know what I've done. I've strayed away from Bridgman's book to talk about Nicolaides and Muybridge, but you know what has happened? For a class about Bridgman, we came a long way from balance, but we didn't. We just demonstrated it subconsciously because balance is so fundamental to life that we see that when we have a book that is, how shall we describe it? Mostly drawings and really difficult text. And over here, it's almost all words. The drawings in Nicolaides' book, many of them are counterproductive. And they're both teaching around the same time, and they're both teaching in the same place. And for the mid-20th century record, the big public record at least, of the Art Students League training for everyone previous to Robert Beverly Hale, these two teachers balance each other out. And if you want to throw a third person into there, put Muybridge into there. I think that is one of the most beautiful photographs I have ever seen in my life. To think that that was 140 some years ago. And there's plenty more where that came from. Rhythm. The continuous slow motion picture has given us a new appreciation of rhythm in all its visible movement. Well, tomorrow we're going to talk more about rhythm. I'm going to try to finish in 5, 6, 7 minutes here. We're going to talk about the difference between this way and that way and this way and the back and forthness. We're talking right now about the this way and that way and this way and that way and this way and that way, the back and forthness that creates rhythm. Not just of the curves, but of the opens and closed. How could I ever draw and remember all of those things? Well, one way would be to look at video and watch it one frame at a time. We have those tools. They couldn't put it in QuickTime and look at it one frame at a time. But gosh, they studied it. They may have gotten more out of their primitive tools than many of us get out of our great tools. And the lessons that animators will give you of the way this cat's bodies are great examples for how things change, and the arcs. Richard Williams shows that. If you were to just take Kimmo Nicolaides and say, you figure this guy's hatchet is going to come down there fast, and if there were moisture on it, it would splat out there below. To look at some of these drawings or any in your collection that you like. And that will have to do with weight and motion. As you study anatomy, you'll start to see that there will be specific muscles that will contract and relax to give you those motions. And one last lesson that will have to do with your project. This is from Nicolaides' book. One last lesson. Exercise 45, contrasting lines. As a matter of pure exercise, draw a straight line to represent some contour on one side of the model. Then attached to that, make a curved line. Continue up or down that side of the figure or object, alternating straight and curved lines and attaching each line to the one before it and the one after it. Proceed in the same way all around the figure, but wherever there is a straight line on one side, try to put a curve opposite on the other side. Use 5-minute poses, always draw around the entire figure, and then look at this statement. These drawings will probably look like charts. Didn't he tell us earlier that if we don't empathize with the model and feel what the model is feeling, all we're going to have is a map? Now he's saying, make a map of where it's straight and curved. It's a whole different kind of balance. It's a whole different kind of alternation. It's graphic. Look what he says will happen. As a natural result of practicing this exercise, you will begin to search the model in order to discover which contours may be best expressed by straight lines and which by curved lines. From now on, this is when you've already drawn for 3 hours. From now on, you do not have to make the straight follow the curve and the curve the straight. You will use each when it seems most suitable. However, the principle of alternation, the principle of balance, the principle of rhythm, works pretty accurately, and you should end up with approximately an equal number of straight and curved lines. Wow, okay. That was from Kimmo Nicolaides, the book that people have opinions about. And when we go to Bridgman, we have pictures to work from. And if you go through these and choose your favorite and do what you will do with them, and just do impulse drawings for the fun of it, just have a ball. Look at how this is about bodies in motion, and this, look at that quote from Bridgman. The feeling of balance must be recorded in the flow or sweep of a drawing's continuity or rhythm. We'll take this up. We've got to finish in a couple minutes here. We're going to take this up tomorrow of straight and curved and backward curve. Okay, let's go to your project. Kimmo Nicolaides, this book was written to be used. It is not meant simply to be read any more than you would sit down to read through an arithmetic book without any attempt to work out the problems it describes. Here is my set of exercises for you. I'm going to have to go about 5 minutes over time. Session 5 project, that's for this next meeting tomorrow. Strike the pose, analyze. Choose a pose that you like. From your photographs, from your Bridgman collection, choose a dozen. Choose a pose. Strike the pose. Here's a little game you can play with your friend. See if you can describe your pose to someone not there. Have them try to strike the same pose. Have someone take pictures. See how badly you described it with words. Repent. Try again with a drawing. See how easily you can draw it? That is an argument for drawing. One drawing is worth 1,000 words. No, 10,000. Do this several times. On the poses you drew, notice or analyze placement of weight, directions of motion, a balance of straight and curved lines, and then redraw the pose as an abstract design of straight lines and curves. Now I'll take out the smart aleckiness. There it is. You can screen grab that, but Vera's going to post it on the in the forum. You will have access to that. That's what to work on. two opposite disciplines. If you were in this position, what would it feel like? Okay, I know it. It's not research from afar. I've been in the skin of this. Then once you get some drawings, let's look at it and see how, as a graphic design, it balances straight lines and curves. There'll be more than that, but one thing at a time. Now, Kimmo Nicolaides' book is a boot camp. Half hour, quarter hour, half hour, 1 hour. This schedule represents 15 hours of actual drawing, which I have divided for convenience into 5 3-hour lessons. Okay, here's our class. Hey, how's that boot camp going with Sergeant Vandruff? Oh, it's great. Come over and join us. Flower arranging and tea. But if you want to put 3 to 6 hours into this between now and tomorrow, you will be heightening your sensitivity. That was poses, balance, and a little on rhythm. I hope you learned. If you didn't, if this was too much theory, now is your time to get out of the classroom and out onto the playground. Moving from the boot camp to the recess metaphor. But you know, when you watch kids at recess, there are some of them, they are going to make the obstacle course difficult for themselves so they'll have more fun. If you're that kind of student, I hope the best for you in these coming hours, and I'll see you tomorrow at the same time. That was session 4 on gesture from our 12-session summer boot camp in 2020. If you want more videos, live sessions, and updates on other offerings, subscribe to my announcement list at marshallart.com.